the concept of rationality. All of the things we're talking about today, we can say that when I say metaphysical, when you hear the word meta, it's always dealing with foundations. You're always questioning where something is coming from. So if you talk about meta-ethics, it's not about what is right and what is wrong, what is ethical and not ethical. It's talking about why is something ethical? What is the moral foundation? What is the moral anchor? If you talk about meta-learning, it's not about learning, but how do you learn about learning, right? And so on and so forth. Meta-ethics, metaphysics, meta-whatever. Rationality. We want to have a meta-rational discussion, right? So I want you guys to, for the next few minutes, just focus a little bit, because this section is a bit, it's a bit deep, okay? Most people divide rationality into two camps. They say there's concepts that are rational and concepts that are irrational. So a rational concept would be something like, I am Fahad. Okay, pretty straightforward. I'm Fahad. Irrational concept would be something like if I said, I am a married bachelor. What do you guys think? So no questions? We're like, oh, okay, that's nice. No pushback on that? Nothing? What do you mean it opposes? Like, I'm a married bachelor. How dare you deny me my rights of being a married bachelor?
Well, you're saying you're married.
Okay.
I guess my definition would be you're, tied to someone in matrimony.
Okay.
Yet you're saying you're also a bachelor.
Yes.
So, which by a definition would mean that you're single and not tied to somebody.
So I'm okay with that.
But how can you do two things that are opposites of one another?
Well, why not? Like, well, why can't I be married and a bachelor? Why can't I be, committed to someone for the rest of my life, something like that, and be completely free at the same time?
Because that would be like saying that the table is white and black, which by definition.
Okay, yeah, I'm good with that too. I'm okay with the table being white and black.
I think we can agree on a dictionary there.
Fair enough. Here's the thing. You may want to go to this person, it's me, let's just say it's me and I say, I'm a married bachelor. You may say something like, look man, and like you rightly said, like that's not logical. That's irrational, it doesn't make any sense. Right, it's two opposite things, they can't exist at the same time. I cannot be Fahad and not Fahad at the same time. This goes against a certain logical principle, what they call mutual exclusivity. Right? So you say, that goes against the principle of mutual exclusivity. But what if I retort, what if I come back and say, prove the principle, the logical principle. Can you do it? You cannot do it. And that's why rationality doesn't have just two categories, there are three categories. What you call rational, irrational, and that which is outside of rationality. Okay? That's where things like logical principles exist. What in philosophical terms they call this axioms, axiomatic truths, basic beliefs, first principles. These are those things that you cannot prove but you know are true. And every single system of thought has it. Science has it. It has axioms and first principles. Religions have it. Christianity, Islam has it. We all have it. There is no theorem that is infinitely defendable. You cannot ask why infinitely. Because what is rationality? Rationality is saying, I doubt what you're saying, give me a reason. But can you do that forever? There is no theorem you can ask why, but you can't say because this, forever. There has to be a stopping point. Like, I'll give you an example. Like my second born, he's the more, how do I make this sound not bad? Animated one in the family, right? So imagine he comes in, his name's Abdurrahman, comes into the kitchen and he takes out a knife, and I'm like, Abdurrahman, put the knife back. And he says, well, why? I'm like, well, it'll cut you. He says, why? Now when he says why, what is he doing? He wants a reason. He wants proof, right? In essence, saying, well, why? Why will it cut me? I'm like, because it's sharp. Well, why is it sharp? I'm like, well, because the manufacturer made it that way. Well, why did the manufacturer make it that way? Well, Because knives are used for cutting. Well, why are knives used for cutting? Well, because they cut things like apples. Well, why do they cut apples? Well, there's a higher utility when you eat an apple that's cut versus eating an apple directly. Well, why? So at a certain point, what am I going to do? Thank you. Why? Because I'm your father and I said so. Khalas, get out of here, right? You cannot ask why infinitely. You have to have a stopping point, right? You can't say because this, because you cannot doubt infinitely. So what we're saying is, if someone says it has to be rational, everything has to be rational, and I won't believe it until you prove it, this cannot go on forever. There's no theorem that is infinitely defendable. You must have something outside of rationality that you know is true, that you cannot prove, but you know it's true. For example, that's something a little more realistic. The existence of the real world. If you try to prove it, good luck, right? But you know it's true. You work like it's true. Now the problem is, what if someone says, you know what? I'm someone who, all this supra-rational stuff, this is all you Muslims and all you people, I only believe in rationality. I will not believe something until you prove it. I will doubt. Okay. The problem is, they're going to come to a certain point, their skepticism will come to a certain point that they have to then doubt their doubt, which leaves them intellectually paralyzed. You can't go anywhere with that, right? Because again, you cannot ask why infinitely. You can't say because this, because this, because this. A way of understanding it is like, imagine someone coming to you and saying, I have the perfect solvent. You guys know what a solvent is? Right? You pour it on something and it dissolves. He says the perfect solvent, it'll dissolve anything. Someone says rationality, I can use rationality for anything. So this person says, I have the perfect solvent, it can dissolve anything. You have to ask the person, okay, fine, what bottle will you keep it in? You have to have at least one thing that it doesn't dissolve, right? Something that is absolute, that which is not soluble, that which is not solvable by rationality. You have to have at least one. That's why one of the names of Allah is As-Samad, that which is, right, absolute. Everything else is relative to that, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay? So, you have to have this. And by the way, this is not me just giving you kind of, some sort of theory, philosophy. This is well known. Science has concepts of the super-rational, first principles. For instance, one of the first principles or axioms within science is that nature is uniform. Okay? In other words, you will mix hydrogen oxygen, you'll get water. You mix hydrogen oxygen again, you'll get water. You mix hydrogen oxygen again, you get water. You will not expect to mix hydrogen and oxygen and get milk. Okay? Based on what? Based on the assumption that nature is uniform. That is an assumption. And you cannot absolutely prove it. You can observe it, but you cannot prove it. It means you could observe it 1,000,000 times. Hydrogen, oxygen, water, hydrogen, oxygen, water, hydrogen, oxygen, water. So now you have a belief, every time hydrogen and oxygen is mixed, that will give you water. You extend that in the future on the assumption that nature is uniform. That nature will continue to be uniform. And this is why people have problems with concepts like miracles, because it goes directly against that, right? Or like, evolution and Adam alayhi salam, because Adam alayhi salam, when you think about how science works, you are looking at phenomena and you are forming patterns. It's like, this is a pattern. You mix hydrogen, oxygen, water, hydrogen, oxygen, water. If you see it enough times, okay, well, you believe now every time you mix hydrogen, oxygen, that will be water. If you see enough times that a birth occurs when you have a male and a female and a child, male, female, child, male, female, child, you see that enough, what goes against that? Well, the creation of Adam alayhi salam and Hawa. Because that did not go by the process that you've observed. But is what you observed, is that actual knowledge or is that belief? Because you've seen it enough times. Again, in the worldview that you have at universities and things like that, just in general, science is taken as some sort of absolute, like knowledge. But it's no more than just watching patterns enough and then establishing a belief based on those patterns. Okay? Anyways, I'm kind of digressing. So every system, every worldview, every system of thought has to accept super rational concepts. So we said science, nature is uniform. The existence of the real world. Again, you cannot move forward unless you believe the world around you exists. Your own existence. And believe me, there were philosophers that kind of denied this and tried to think about, how do I know I exist? Right? And they're not in mental institutions. They're postmodernists. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, so, all right. Now you might say, but Fahad, all this stuff is great. Now you're bringing in philosophy. But what does it have to do with Islam? So let's apply some Islamic parlance to it. When we talk about the super rational, you can equate it to what we call the fitrah. Rational concepts were called aqli, irrational, maybe we can say ghair aqli. Okay? So this concept of the fitrah, what is housed in the fitrah? So we said super rational concepts. Things like logical principles are part of your fitrah. Things like your perception of beauty is in the fitrah. Things like smells are part of the fitrah, right? You walk into a room and you're like, man, something stank. And your friend walks in and says, take it in, bro, it smells amazing. Right? You're like, no, man, something really smells. Like, prove to me rationally that it's like, it's not a rational concept, right? There's no way to rationally prove that. Okay? Similarly, if you know, just kind of observing natural beauty. Let's say my wife and I we see the sunset, and you know, my wife says, wow, that is just amazing, it's beautiful. And I'm like, nah, it's pretty ugly. Prove to me rationally that it's not a rational question, right? So part of our fitrah has to do with concepts of beauty, concepts of smells, logical principles are part of the fitrah. Okay? So let's come back to worldviews. And hopefully this will make sense now that we understood a little bit about the super rational and the fitrah. One can think of a worldview as comprising of a number of basic beliefs, axioms, basic beliefs, first principles, which are philosophically equivalent to the axioms of the worldview considered as logical or consistent theory. These basic beliefs, by definition, cannot by definition be proven in the logical sense. You cannot prove your existence, you cannot prove logical principles, those are not provable things, but you know they're true, okay? Be proven within the world precisely because they are axioms and are typically argued from rather than argued for. In other words, every single worldview has axioms. They have certain things that are outside of the worldview or outside of rationality that they are assumed. Okay? However, the last part, their coherence can be explored philosophically and logically. So just because you cannot rationally prove something that's part of the super-rational, it doesn't mean you cannot explore it. Okay? I'll give you an example of that very quickly here. Actually, let me give you an example of that. So in another course that we do, called the Divine Reality, it's a course about atheism. And one of the questions that arises is that who has the burden of proof when it comes to God, the discussion about God? So what would you say? So is it the one that denies God? Does he have the burden of proof? Or does the one who believes in God have the burden of proof? You know what I mean by burden of proof? Everyone clear about that? You know what right? So who has yeah?
The person that denies the existence of God.
Okay, so why would that be the case? Like if you were arguing with an atheist and they would say, look, we believe in nothing. And you're the one that's saying that there is something, so you have the burden of proof.
Because you're denying something. I mean, the existence is something that's fundamental as an axiom. And I exist, how to say this? I exist not mean, my existence is contingent to another existence. So that's logical. To get to the point where...
But see, wait, let me stop you right there. So when you're saying I exist, if something exists, there's causal, but now you're getting into the proof. So you've already said, okay, so I have the burden of proof, let me prove it now. I'm just simply asking about who has the burden of proof. Yeah, go ahead.
So it's logical to think that we believe there has to be a necessary existence. So
So again, you're getting into proof now. All I'm saying is who has the burden of proof? Who has to come with the proof and say God exists or God does not exist? Which me or the atheist? That's all I'm asking. The believer. So now the question is why? Why does so the believer has the burden of proof? Okay, I would disagree, and here's why. I want you to follow me on this, okay? And it has to do with basic beliefs, what we call self-evident truths, axioms, everything we've been talking about. The burden of proof is going to be on the one who denies something that is axiomatically true. If someone says, I don't believe in logic, who has the burden of proof? You to prove that logic exists, or the guy that's saying there's logic doesn't exist? What do you think? The guy that says logic doesn't exist, right? Not you, right? You're part of the normal reality and normal people, right? Self-evident truths, the burden of proof for self-evident truths is from the one that denies self-evident truths. What are some of the qualities? Now, I'm not saying this is how you prove self-evident truths, because that would be against the definition, right? If they're self-evident, you don't prove them. What are some of their characteristics? Okay, yeah. Okay, they're universal, but not in the sense that everyone believes them. Okay, that's one of their qualities. They are universal. They're cross-cultural. Okay, they are untaught. So I'll give you an example. This is from the other course as well. Let's say you have a friend and you haven't seen him in a long time. His name is Jim. Okay, so Jim calls you up. He says, hey man, I'm in town. And you're like, oh man, Jim was a weirdo. I don't want to meet Jim. Right? Like, I haven't seen him in 10 years. Not trying to meet this guy. But you're like, I'm a Muslim. I should meet him. That's part of my deen. Maybe make da'wah to him, whatever. So like, all right, Jim, I'll meet you. So now you meet Jim, and he comes to you and he says, I found out something amazing. You ready for this? And in your head, you're like, oh man, Jim, you haven't changed at all. Right? Crack theory. He's like, you know what? The past, it's not real. Amazing, right? Okay, let's stop here for a second. Who has the burden of proof in this scenario? Me, to prove the past does exist? Or Jim, who's saying that the past does not exist? Who has the burden of proof? Jim. Why? Because he's denying something that is self-evidently true. Okay? So when I said characteristics, one is that it's universal. You're not going to go to Australia and all the Australians believe that the past doesn't exist. Right? It's untaught. It's not like you get to be 6 years old and your mom says, son, come sit here. The past? What happened 5 minutes ago? That actually happened. I want to teach you this fun. No! You intuitively, naturally know the past exists. There's no it's self-evidently true. Right? It's, again, cross-cultural and so on. Burden of proof is on the one that denies things that are self-evidently true. Okay? In other words, things that are against the fitrah. And the existence of a creator, here I'm not talking about Allah as we understand Him completely with all of His names and attributes. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the phenomena of He's Khaliq. He is the creator. Meaning, there is a causal link between cause and effect. That is self-evidently true. When you see a painting, you don't sit there and go like, oh, that must have come from nothing. You clearly say, there was a painter. Cause, effect. When a ball is thrown from the other side of the room and it lands somewhere, some object, the baby naturally turns around. Because they understand, intuitively, cause, effect. Or effect and cause. It must have come from somewhere. So similarly, when you think about creation, the creative cause, there's a cause and effect. Causal links are self-evidently true. The one that denies that is the one that has to bring the proof. Make sense? Okay. So the reason I'm mentioning all of that is to kind of elucidate or make clear the concept of self-evident truths, axioms, and the fact that when you say we don't have to prove necessarily the existence of God, even though we do have rational arguments for that, it's a separate issue, but the burden of proof is upon the one denying that, not the one that claims that there are causal links that occur in the natural world and that those go back to an ultimate creator. Okay, yeah.
So what if the proof that other person is trying to bring to you is incorrect proof, but they undeniably believe that
That's okay.
How do you combat that? How do you deal with
So here's the thing. Some things you'll be able to combat, some things you will not. Guidance is in the hands of Allah. Right? So, because remember, when you're talking to people, you're talking to an entire project, an entire human being. That's why I'm trying to stress the concept of rationality as well. We're not talking to rational robots. You're talking to a person that has rationality and a fitrah and a qalb and a nafs and and so on and so forth. An entire package that's coming with not only rationality but a whole world of experiences. Maybe you don't know that this person when they were little, that their father abused them, and all of that baggage has now entered into the discussion. You don't know that, right? So there's so much out of the purview of your knowledge. That's why, when you're having discussions with people, you take everything into consideration, and then you make dua for the person. And if they don't accept, they don't accept. That's not your responsibility anyway. Alhamdulillah. Imagine if it was, we'd be in trouble, right? Okay, let's continue on. So let's explore the fitrah before lunch quickly. What do we mean by the fitrah? And this is going to be kind of the end of the section on the metaphysical backdrop, but it's a slightly long section, so we may need to cover some of it after lunch. All right? So now, when we talk about the fitrah, I'm going to go with a working definition. So the difference between a definition and a working definition is that a working definition is what we're using just for our purposes right now. The reason I'm using a working definition is because even trying to understand the concept of fitrah bil Arabi is tough enough, let alone bringing that into the English language. Okay? So for right now, we'll use this as a working definition so we can understand conceptually what I mean by the fitrah. Okay? So what is my working definition? I'm saying that the fitrah can be defined as the original, normative, we all know what that is, right, from this morning, disposition. All right? So let me start with the concept of being original. So the term itself, fitrah, comes from the triliteral root fatara, all right, which indicates origination, which indicates something that is original, the starting point. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفِي اللَّهِ شَكْ فَاتِرِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, can there be any doubt about God? I know the translation says creator, but fatir is different than khaliq. Originator, the one who brings into existence out of nothing, ex nihilo. That's what fatir is. Okay? In fact, when you go to like Arabic dictionaries and things like that, fatir is actually the baby, the tooth of the baby camel, the new tooth. In other words, it's fatir because it cleaves the gum and it's new. It's the new tooth, right? That's where the term comes from. So fatara not only means original, but it means to cleave, to break open, to cleft asunder. Yes?
I'm reminded of the story of Ibn Abbas.
Yeah.
And the two Benjamins, or the originators of the language at the time,
No.
came to him, this is him talking about the meaning of the word fatara.
Yeah.
Came to him fighting over a well.
Right.
Each one of them says, Ana fatartuha.
I originated it, mashallah.
So he mentioned that story to Abbas
Right.
as specific meaning of fatara to originate.
Right, for the original. Like it's mine, I started it. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So the concept of, Jazakallah khair, the concept of fitra or fatara comes from origination. That which comes out of nothing. That was something new that started, right? And like I said, it also means to cleft asunder, to break open, right? And so we were talking about the new tooth of the baby camel. It cleaves the gum to come out, okay? Another way of understanding it is from this hadith. So Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu reports that on the night of ascension, you guys know what the night of ascension is? What is the night of ascension? What's the Arabic? What is it? The Mi'raj, Isra wal Mi'raj. Okay, good. So on the night of ascension, when the Prophet ﷺ went from Mecca to Al-Aqsa and then up, he said on the night of ascension, the Prophet ﷺ was presented with two vessels, one full of wine, one full of milk. The Prophet ﷺ looked at them both and he chose the vessel full of milk. Jibreel alayhi salam says to him, all praise is due to Allah who guided you to that which is natural, for had you selected the wine, your nation would have been led astray. The words that Jibreel uses, Alhamdulillahi alladhi hadaka lil fitra. All praise is due to Allah who has guided you to the fitrah. Okay, what's the connection between milk and the fitrah being original? The mother. What's the first thing that usually enters the baby's stomach? Milk. That's number one. Number two, the concept of the milk going inside the stomach and the opening of the stomach, that's also called fatara, right? To cleave open the stomach. It's the first thing that goes in. Second, the baby intuitively and naturally knows to go to the mother. Again, you're not going to sit there and go through some, what's called multivariable calculus to teach the child about how to go to the mother. It goes to the mother naturally, right? So the concept of relating that to origination, milk being the first thing that enters the child's stomach, right? And that they naturally incline towards that. Okay, normative. So for those of you who are nerdy and like Arabic grammar, the word fitra is what's known as an ism al-hayya. So these are words that have to do with the way you do something or the way something is done. Okay? So for instance, another word that's very common you might know, qibla, on the same formation, right? The way you turn or the direction you turn, qibla. Jilsa, the way you sit. Khilqa, the way something is created. So these are on that form, the way normatively. What should be normal, the fitrah is what is normal, what is normative. Okay? The Prophet ﷺ says, no child is born, ma min mawludin illa, no child is born except that he is born upon the fitrah. Okay? His parents make him a Jew, a Christian, or a Magian. Now, in other hadith collections, this last part of the hadith is not mentioned. Most people know the hadith up to the point where it says, parents make him a Jew, Christian, or Magian, khalas. But in Sahih Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ continues and says, as an animal delivers a child with limbs intact, do you detect any flaw? Here's my question. Why did the Prophet ﷺ add this? Why is he mentioning this? I want you to think about this from the concept of normativity. Yes?
Directs people to observe the natural phenomena.
Okay, directs people to observe natural. What else? From the vantage point of normativity, we spoke about what this is this morning. Why have I put this under the section of normative? Let me get first. Yeah.
It says, as an animal delivers a child with limbs intact, so it's just the Prophet Muhammad giving us what it is like.
Okay. All right. Good. Yes. It's more basic than that.
Is he using nature as a baseline? Is it comparative baseline to what's normal?
Okay, you're close. Yeah, go ahead.
We have the same origin.
Same origin. Okay, maybe.
As normal is having 4 limbs intact.
Bam! Normal is having 4 limbs intact. How would you so the idea is, if you see an animal with 3 limbs, you immediately recognize, whoa, that's abnormal. Do you get what I'm saying? You don't need, you don't need like syllogistic logic to determine that animal is, that's normal, that's abnormal. Like, I think I have this hadith, or not this hadith, ayah. Yes, in Surah Al-Mulk, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, again, referring to the concept of normativity versus, He says, أَفَمَنْ يَمْشِي مُكِبًّا عَلَى وَجْهِهِ أَهْدَىٰ أَمْ مَنْ يَمْشِي سَوِيًّا عَلَى الصِّرَاطِ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ. Then the one who walks upside down on his face, is he more guided than the one who walks up on his face, more guided than the one who's upright on a straight path? If you walked outside and you saw people walking upside down, you wouldn't just walk by and be like, oh, that's normal. You'd be like, what is going on, right? That's weird. That's abnormal. That's not normative. Our understanding of what is normative, what is normal, comes from the fitrah. That's why it's such an important part of the fitrah, right? Such an important part of who we are. So that's why when we say we're cis-normative, that's part of our fitrah. There's a male and a female. No matter how much society wants to say that's not true, by our fitrah, we understand that's a reality. We're heteronormative by our fitrah. You don't have to get into, arguments about procreation and all this other stuff. By our fitrah, we know that's normal, right? Okay. So, and then, actually the hadith continues. Abu Hurairah mentions the ayah, فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا. That so direct your face towards the deen, inclining to truth. Adhere to the fitrah upon which He has created all people. So first and foremost, we know that Allah has created every single human being upon this fitrah. This fitrah is good. This fitrah is normative. This fitrah, and here's the question I have for you, can this fitrah be changed? It's a question now. Read the ayah. Read the ayah. What do you think? Can the fitrah be changed? How about this? According to the ayah, can the fitrah be changed? No? Yeah.
Yes, he's talking that the fitrah, it's, the person is born with fitrah, and that's what that's a there is no change to this, notion of coming to life with fitrah. But to change, of course, we see it. See people, their fitrah change. Like the people claiming there's multiple gender.
Okay. So it can be changed or it cannot be changed?
But to come as a baby, no, that's not going to change. It's always a new baby going to have fitrah.
So it can change as you grow up?
Yeah.
Okay. But Allah says, لا تبديل لخلق الله. So there's no change in the creation of Allah.
لا تبديل لخلق الله means the design that Allah creates in a new baby, new baby is always going to come with fitrah.
Okay.
That's what I think what the ayah is talking about.
Okay, fair enough. Anybody else? Yeah.
When you, like your fitrah itself doesn't change, but you can go against your fitrah and
Okay.
make choices that are against this, like intuitive design set.
Okay. Good. Yeah.
It could be clouded, but it will always be there, so you can come back. The concept of like when you sin is a black dot.
Sure.
That doesn't mean it can never be erased, but it's a matter of
Okay. All right.
cloud.
All right. All right. So this is why I asked this question on the slide. Okay. So I said, can the fitrah be changed? Some people said no, based on the ayah, there's no change. Some people said it's like being clouded. Some people, Here's another ayah in the Quran, and I will mislead them. This is quoting Shaitan. I will mislead them, and I will arouse in them sinful desires, and I will command them so they will slit the ears of cattle, and I will command them so they will change the creation of Allah. So the khalq Allah, Shaitan is saying, I'll change it. Allah is saying, there's no change in the creation of Allah. Shaitan is saying, I will have them change the creation of Allah. Allah says, there's no change in the creation of Allah. So can it be changed or can't it be changed? The issue is, I know where you're going. Okay. The issue is the word changed is the issue. Because you see, here, oops, where was this going? Here, Allah says, La tabdila li khalqillah. So yes, in English, we translate that as change. But when Shaitan talks about it, he says, فَلَا يُغَيِّرُنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ. It's a different word. It has a different meaning. This is the problem with translations, by the way. This is why I was saying with deen, with change. So if you're not studying Arabic, this should be a good reason for you to get down and start studying it, because you easily get tripped up. There's a difference between tabdeel and yughayir, right? To change. Because tabdeel means to take something and completely replace it. Badala, in other words. When you take, like if I had this coffee cup and I completely change it with another coffee cup. That's what the first ayah was talking about. La tabdila li khalqillah. You cannot exchange it for something else. If you want to use exchange, maybe is a better way. You cannot change it with something else. But you can affect it in the sense that there are things that will cause it to be different. Like I could change this, scratch it until you get to the bottom and you have, the blue color gets faded. Okay? So from that perspective, yeah, it can be affected, but you cannot replace it with something altogether. Every single person has a fitrah, but that fitrah can be affected. How do we know that? Well, because remember, the Prophet ﷺ says, it is his parents that make him a Jew, a Christian, or a Magian. Your environment can have an effect on your fitrah, but you cannot do away with your fitrah. You cannot just say, okay, I'll come up with something else. Is that clear? Everyone understand the difference? Everyone motivated to study more Arabic now? Okay. So that's one aspect. Original normative disposition. We were on normative. Another aspect the Prophet ﷺ speaks about, he says that there's 10 acts that are amongst the fitrah, or 10 are among the fitrah acts, and he specifically uses the word fitrah. And so amongst them is clipping the mustache, letting the beard grow, using a toothstick, snuffing water in the nose, cutting the nails, washing the finger joints, and so on and so on and so forth. Why did the Prophet ﷺ describe these as fitrah? How is this part of the fitrah? Yeah.
Because just like all of this not to a baby,
A bit louder, sorry.
you have, because just like a baby is born,
Mm-hmm.
you have to do everything for a baby, and the baby has to do nothing for you.
Okay. Maybe. All right. Yeah.
These different acts are part of just like keeping yourself clean and hygiene.
Thank you. Cleanliness is what ties them together. And that's part of your fitrah. If someone comes and says, you know what, I prefer being dirty, logically prove to me that being clean is better. You might be able to tell them like, okay, look man, that's not good because, you get a cold or whatever it is and blah, blah, blah. But my man here, Jake Gyllenhaal, he said this, more and more I find bathing to be less necessary. At times I also think there's a whole world of not bathing that is really helpful for skin maintenance. We naturally cleanse ourselves and so on and so forth. I always thought that if I was ever on a set, a'udhu billah, you want to shake my hand, I'm like, yo, I'm good. Cleanliness is part of our fitrah, right? Now you can't logically, it's not a logical proposition, it's part of our fitrah. We understand that, right? Okay, so we already spoke about this. Let me talk about the last term of the fitrah, and that was disposition. So we talked about original, we talked about normative. Let's talk about disposition. So there's two views that our classical scholars held about the fitrah. All right, so I want to be kind of academically fair here and make sure we mention both of them. One view holds that the fitrah contains primary inborn knowledge of Allah's existence, the fact that He deserves to be worshipped, and some basic morals. That's one view. The other view says, no, the fitrah does not contain knowledge, but rather it is like a propensity or a potency. It directs one towards the truth, right? So rather it directs one towards the truth. The potency disposed towards the recognition of God, that He alone is worthy of worship, and certain morals. Now, tomato, it's a scholarly discussion. If you want, I can send you some details on it, where that scholarly discussion comes from. Is it knowledge? Is it not knowledge? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that when we took you out of the wombs of your mother and you came out, la ta'lamuna shay'a, like you did not know anything. So the scholars that took that ayah and said, okay, so we cannot classify that as ilm, knowledge, based on that ayah, so therefore it must be a propensity. Scholars came back and said something else, and then back and forth, not the topic today. Point being, there's two opinions. Whichever opinion you incline towards, it doesn't matter when we understand how to deal with the fitrah. And this comes now to the point, we circle all the way back around to why metaphysical assumptions, worldviews, and understanding the human being are important. Most people, when they're dealing with people who are, let's say, having doubts, or non-Muslims, or ex-Muslims, or whatever it might be, they are only in the domain of using rational arguments, because they think rational arguments is the objective. The objective is not the argument and winning the debate. The objective is to get this person from the state that his fitrah is in to a state where his fitrah is clean, let's say. Closer to Allah at the end of the day, right? And so if you want to use medical terminology, to bring his fitrah back to a state of homeostasis, to be functioning properly. And that's not just by way of rational arguments. Yes, some people will use rational arguments. But there are a whole range of other ways in which you, as Imran mentioned, you can uncloud the fitrah. You can bring it back to its unchanged state, in a sense, if you want to look at it that way. So amongst that is revelation. Now by revelation, I don't mean the rational arguments of the Qur'an. That's different. I'm talking about the rhetorical nature of the Qur'an, the beauty of the Qur'an. And that's a different dynamic. Let me just to highlight this point, I need to go back, I forgot to mention this earlier, to this point here. When you look at the Quran, do you think, when we think about how Allah approaches the human being, do you think Allah primarily approaches a human being and targets the super rational or the rational? What is the primary target of ayat? What do you think? How many people say super rational? Okay, how many people say rational? Okay, the answer is super rational. Because without the super rational, rationality falls apart. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually uses ayat to target super rational primarily. What's an ayah, by the way? What's an ayah? Verse? Okay, what else? How do we understand? What is an ayah linguistically? A sign, right? But let me stop here for a second. Let's understand what we mean by ayah, just very quickly. It'll kind of elucidate this point I'm trying to make. So the term ayah, it comes from the triliteral alif, ya, ya. Okay? In other words you can derive from that, ayu. So when you want to ask, for instance, ayu a'mal afdal, which of these deeds is the best? So you want to have these deeds, among the deeds, there should be one that's manifest, that's the best one. Okay? But an ayah is not just a sign, but a sign that has certain qualities. Proof is again, I don't want to use proof, right? Ayah is very specific. So I'll give an example to kind of elucidate this point. Let's say that I graduated from Michigan State University. This is a little tidbit about myself, okay? Back in the Stone Age, long time ago, undergrad, okay? Anyway, so let's say I moved to Texas, it's been 20 years since I graduated, whatever it was, I don't remember how long ago it was, and I'm unpacking some stuff in my attic, and all of a sudden I see my gown and my cap. So when I see it, immediately I'm taken back to my day of graduation. I remember, going up on stage. I remember waiting to go up on stage. I remember that my last name starts with a T, and it was annoying to wait for 250 people before they would call my name. So just sitting there like, right? I remember the look on my parents' face. Wow, maybe he made something out of himself, right? Right? All those things immediately come back to me, just from looking at my graduation cap and gown, right? Now here's the question. Did I have to go through a process of learning something for that to happen? No, I didn't have to learn physics and math and chemistry and blah, 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 right? Number two, did that take time or did it happen immediately? Immediately. The two qualities of ayat is that number one, they affect you immediately, and number two, there's no information transfer. Now let me qualify that. You can learn things that serve as a backdrop that make ayat effective. So I'm not saying learning is not a part of understanding ayat, but the effect of an ayah, it's immediate, and you're not in the process of learning when it happens. So when we look at ayat, their primary target is the fitrah. Does that make sense? Right? So they happen not by way of rational arguments, not always by way of rational arguments, but primarily by the effect directly upon the fitrah. That's why when you go to the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is constantly talking about reflecting upon the natural world. إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ. Why does Allah mention all those things of the natural world? Those aren't arguments. They're not propositions. They're not saying A, B, therefore C. In the Quran, you will not find discursive reasoning. You guys know what discursive reasoning is? So like what we call logic that's based on propositions. Okay, so you, like for instance, a deductive argument. Deductive argument is you have two propositions, you have two premises and a conclusion, right? So premise A, all presidents of the United States were men. Premise B, Biden is the current president of the United States. Conclusion, Biden is a man. Not really, he's a genocidal maniac, but that's besides the point. Anyways, but you understand, that's a deductive argument, okay? So, you won't find that discursive reasoning in the Quran. Allah does not give you premise A, premise B, therefore C. But Allah speaks in terms of ayat. Because he knows the human being unlike you and I think we know the human being, that you feed him a rational argument and out comes a shahada. Right? That's not how that works. Okay, where's my clicker here? So back to how to uncloud the fitrah, especially when you're dealing with doubts and things like that. One way of doing that, and that's why I mention here, revelation, not the arguments, the beauty of the Quran. And this is something that's, after lunch, I'll mention a few of these, I think will be quite interesting. So Quranic beauty, meaning the ayat, tadabbur upon the Quran, to really ponder upon the Quran, right? Experiences. Last night we spoke about trauma, right? Finding meaning in suffering. Some traumatic experiences cause the fitrah to be unclouded, like we mentioned last night. Positive experiences, human relationships. How many people came to Islam just by, let's say, knowing a Muslim? How many people came back to Islam because of a relationship they had with a Muslim?
Indonesia, the whole country.
Yeah, all of the Malay archipelago, because I'm studying in Malaysia right now, all of the Malay archipelago, there was no sort of like violent armies, and very minimal. Most of it was by way of traders, right? And by way of, certain villages coming to Islam and the kings and so on and so forth. And it's very fascinating, right? Yes?
When you mentioned the word tadabbur, is not something that we do using aql, using reason?
So it's aql and fitrah.
So tadabbur, that's required.
Required, or what do you mean? Because there's tadabbur and there's tadakkur.
No, you mentioned these are all like the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala communicates with us. We are receiving the information and directly understanding it.
Right.
Or embarking and having some meaning.
So let me stop you there.
Yeah.
I didn't say directly understanding it. I'm saying for it to have an effect on you. This is a bit different, right? So understanding is something different. You need to put in time and effort to understand. But I'm saying that phenomena that happens. Like me seeing my gown, that's something that happens immediately, right? That's essentially the effect of an ayah. It brings you closer to Allah like this. Rational arguments can as well. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying throw rationality outside and don't worry about it. But there's an effect that calls you. There's something you feel. Like for instance, when you go, let's say, how many people have gone for Hajj or Umrah? Raise your hands. Really? Man, you all need to go, man. Okay, you went for Hajj or Umrah? Okay, have you gone? Not yet? May Allah bless all of you to go for Hajj or Umrah, or both, inshallah. Ameen. The first time you saw the Kaaba, how did you feel?
I was a child, I never forgot.
You still didn't forget it, right? I'll tell you. The first time I went, we arrived in Jeddah, and then we had to drive, and we got to Mecca around very early morning time. So if you've ever been there, it's like there's birds and stuff, and it's a very beautiful, serene time. I remember walking in, and this is before they had all of these issues with the men have to be in ihram and stuff like that, for those of you who recently went. You could just walk in, and we walked in, myself and my wife, and we saw the Kaaba, and I was just breathless. I looked over at my wife, and she had tears in her eyes, right? It's this state of awe that you enter. You can't explain it. Because on a purely utilitarian worldview, what are you looking at? Looking at a cube. But why is it that when you look at this cube, it brings this sort of emotions? Like if you go to how many people have been in Niagara Falls? Man, y'all need to travel, man. Look at him. He goes everywhere and y'all go nowhere, right? Okay. I'm hoping you guys have been to, what's it called, right here in California? Yosemite. How many people have been to Yosemite? Allahu Akbar. And we still have people that haven't gone. How do you live here and not go? I went from Texas to Yosemite, man. Anyways, for those of you who went to Yosemite, when you see those grand falls and things like that, how do you feel? You're in a state of awe. And that state of awe, you cannot sit there and be like, okay, this is a distinct rational argument. That it has nothing to do with that. You are being put in a certain state that affects your fitrah directly. That awe that you feel, that's what I'm talking about, the effect of the ayat. When you read a certain ayah of the Quran, it puts you in that state once you have done the tadabbur and gone through it, the effect of the ayah. That's basically what I'm talking about. And I went on a bit long on that. But anyway, okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
You talked about fitra, kulla mawludun based on hadith, kulla mawludun
Yep.
fitra.
Yep.
And the first thing the ayah is going to target, like not the rational, it's fitra, it hit the fitra.
Supra-rational.
Yeah, super rational.
Fitra, yes.
So what's the reason behind, like, all of the people have the fitra of they are Muslim and kulla mawludun yuladu ala al-fitra fa'abawahu yahawidanahu
Right.
wa nasranahu.
Naam. Yep.
So what's the reason behind this? If all of the people cannot, like, cannot bring the value for them, if they are hearing verses of Quran and they're
Right.
reciting, it is not like same for everyone. If
Sure.
I'm reciting one ayat, it
Right.
is different for me, but for my son or for my wife, it is different. What is the
So there's a number of reasons that the fitrah could be clouded. There's some people who are doing less sins, some people who are more sins. Sins have, this is later on in the course, inshallah we get to it. Sins have an impact on you. Right? So the more someone sins, the more the fitrah gets clouded. So you're not able to then, like that dua of Umar ibn Khattab. Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqa wa razukna ittiba'. Right? Wa arina al-batila batila wa razukna ijtinaba. Right? So, oh Allah, show me truth as truth and let me follow it. And show me falsehood as falsehood and keep me away from it. Okamaqal. Right? So, it's not a simple thing about, okay, well, I have fitrah, I'm a Muslim, I was born a Muslim, and therefore I should. No, but your spirituality is going to go up and down, right? Maybe you sin, you do tawbah, and you come back to the same ayah, and you're like, wow, I didn't understand it, I didn't know it meant that, right? But so, one of the things that I want to stress here, that's why I'm saying rational arguments have their place, but so does spirituality, so does your connection with Allah. All of those have an impact. When you read the Quran, that's why the Quran is like an ocean, right? Because you could read it, then read it again, and read it again. You always see things that are just new, depending on your own disposition, where you are, depending on your own experience, where you are in life. That can have an effect too. Like for instance, when people talk about science and Islam, they always quote this one ayah, right? Sanurihim ayatina fil afaq. And bam, they stop right there, right? So we will show them our signs in the horizons. Is that the end of the ayah for those of you who know it? وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ, right? And in themselves. But people don't read that part. They just read the first part. Here's why, and this is gonna tie into what I'm saying here. First of all, sanurihim. It's in the future tense, meaning whenever you read this ayah, there's always gonna be something else that Allah will show you, right? So in the realm of science, you'll always discover new things. Okay? But when you talk about yourself, وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ, who you were at 20 is very different than who you are at 30, which is very different than who you are at 40, right? You as a person change. And so Allah says, سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا. In yourselves, yourself at 20 is different than yourself at 30, is different than yourself at 40. And every single stage you might see something that you didn't really know before, because you have matured, right? So the human being is not like a monolith. You grow older, you get experiences, you sin, you repent, you have a community around you, you spend more time with certain people, less time with other people, and so on. All of that has an impact, right? And that's why the Prophet ﷺ says that, it's his parents that make him a Jew, a Christian, or a Magian, meaning the environment has an impact. So the environment will have an impact on how the state of your fitrah is. Does that make sense? Yeah? Yeah.
You didn't say that ayat are pointers that evoke the fitrah, that point us towards the fitrah.
Yeah, you could say that, yeah. They target the fitrah, basically, right?
I'm reminded of when you mentioned Yosemite.
Yeah,
The old college friend, this was a long time ago.
right. When people actually traveled and went to go see the natural world,
I remember we sat
not to knock anyone here, of course.
and argued about things.
Right.
And we went to Yosemite.
Okay.
And there's a big tree there.
Right.
A huge tree. And you feel you're on a different planet. There's nothing on the planet that is this big.
Right,
tree.
right.
And you look at it, and this old colleague who used to argue about for atheisms and theism.
Right.
He thinks it's subhanallah.
No, it's true. So I was mentioning this earlier. I have a presentation online because my dissertation is about beauty, actually, natural beauty, and how it affects the fitrah. So I did a presentation, you can find it online, it's called Beauty and the Recognition of God. And my argument in that is simply to say, and I was mentioning this earlier to some of the brothers, is that the more natural beauty you're exposed to, the less your ego is. Your ego goes down. And I go through the presentation of how that is actually understood and why Allah points us towards natural beauty. Because the thing that keeps a person from, let's say, worshiping Allah or becoming Muslim is not because, oh, the rational argument wasn't strong enough. Many times it's ego. In fact, most of the time it's ego. It was shaitan, ego. Abu Jahl, ego. You know, all of the people that reject, you say, most of the time it was ego, right? Anyway, so moving on, Fir'aun, ego, again, anyways. So coming back to unclouding the fitrah. So they can be by natural beauty, trauma, positive experiences, human relationships. Reflection, introspection was what we were talking about, tadabbur. The last one I'll touch here, and then we'll open up for some Q&A before lunch. Spirituality. And here what I'm talking about is, yes, the spirituality of the person getting closer and closer to Allah, but even spiritual acts that other people can see you do can bring the fitrah back to a state of homeostasis. So you know Hamza Zortzis, the CEO and you know my boss, I guess you can call him that, he says that when he accepted Islam, but it wasn't until he actually let me take that back. He says that what caused him to accept Islam was that he went and stood in salah with Muslims. That was it. That was the main driver. So sometimes, you know, people do like fast-a-thons and things like that. And people like criticize them, like, well, why is the MSA doing a fast-a-thon, man? Well, what are they going to get out of that? They're not Muslim, they're kuffar. What are they going to do with this fast-a-thon, right? But you don't know. There's a certain spiritual state they could enter into, and that act of worship that you and I maybe belittle, right? That brings them to Islam. So spiritual acts can have that effect as well, right? Things that maybe it's not affecting us, right? We've been fasting our whole lives or whatever, so we don't get the same thing. But someone that hasn't had that experience, completely different dynamic. Yes?
SubhanAllah, some of the things that we have gotten accustomed to make routine.
Yeah.
We're losing the value of spirituality. But I know a human being who accepted Islam by once listening to recitation of the Quran, people praying Jama'ah,
Yeah.
the Mughal had a great voice,
Yeah.
does not know Arabic.
This is what?
This person did not know Arabic.
Right.
Just the sound.
Yeah.
He said, I felt something in my heart, I couldn't explain it, I don't understand this, but kept looking until I got into Islam.
Yeah.
From the view and the aura and
Yeah, there's an oral phenomena of the Quran, which we don't consider. Because we're so, you know, rational robots, rational arguments. We've been so like, that there's an oratory beauty of the Quran that in and of itself has an impact, right? So you're right. I mean, this is one case. I can tell you a few cases like that. People just heard like a few ayat of the Quran, and that was enough for them. We had like open, we did this one like open masjid thing, and we had. I used to work for Ayira at the time, and they had this what they call freestanding displays, 24 of them that took you through the life of Isa alayhi salam. Very amazing. Like for your masjid, it's a great way to make da'wah because it's not harsh. It just, here's the life of Isa alayhi salam. So it takes you to the Quranic narrative. Person walks through, by the 24th, you know, freestanding display, they've gotten a whole view of Isa alayhi salam, the ayats in the Quran, Trinity, and blah, 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 in a way that's not abrasive. And one of the last stations we had was listening to Surah Maryam. So many people are like, I just can't explain it. You know, like I don't know what it is. It's something about, you know, I don't know what it means, but it just sounds beautiful, you know. Anyways, let me go ahead and, I'm going to break here and open up for Q&A. If you want to stick around for Q&A, well and good. If not, you can, you know, take a break. I think lunch is going to be at 12:30. That's why Imran's not here. So we have about 15 minutes for Q&A. Or we can just, you guys can just take a break before lunch. It's up to you guys. Because I think this is a good stopping point before the next section. Yes? So a bit louder, sorry.
Do you believe that it's possible to attain a pure fitrah consistently, like overcoming the trauma and like environment and stuff like that, or do you believe that it's always going to be like, there's going to be something cloudy and not?
So here's the thing. your iman will always decrease and increase. That's a part of human nature. In fact, because this is centered around the qalb, the heart, which is, we're going to get into this later, a little later, even the word qalb itself is about turning over. Sometimes you will have very high iman, sometimes you'll have very low iman. It's a part of the human kind of experience, the Muslim experience, right? So, can it be that you'll always have high iman? No. But you try, that's the ideal, but that's not the case, right? And I think people are familiar with the story of Handala, for those of you who know. So, Handala was a companion of the Prophet ﷺ, and he said one day he went to Abu Bakr, he said, Nafika Handala. Handala has become a munafiq, he's become a hypocrite. So Abu Bakr is like, why do you say that? He says, well, because when we're with the Prophet ﷺ, and he's talking about, the Day of Judgment, and my iman is through the roof. But when I come home, I get busy with my family and all of these things, and I don't feel the same way. So Abu Bakr says, well, yeah, I feel the same way, right? Let's go take this to the Prophet ﷺ. So he goes to the Prophet ﷺ, and he says, Ya Rasulullah, nafiqa Handala, like I've become a munafiq. So the Prophet ﷺ says, well, what do you mean, right? What's going on? So he says, when we're with you, we hear you speaking and we're with you, and in your presence, our iman is through the roof. And when we go home, our iman it falls, right? We're not in the same state. So the Prophet ﷺ looks at him and says, oh, Handala, sa'a wa sa'a, right? Some days are like this and some days are like this. If your iman was always like it was when you're with me, the angels would come down and shake your hand on the road, right? But that's not the project here, right? You will always have vicissitudes with the goal of trying to increase your iman, right? And this is, and before I let you go and end on this point, a couple, I think 2 years ago, I gave the Eid khutbah after Ramadan. And my khutbah was about all the people that are extremely happy that it is Eid and that Ramadan is finally over. Now you might be thinking, what are these crazy people, right? Like, what do you mean? Because a lot in the Muslim community, you hear this talk about, oh man, Ramadan's so spiritual. I feel so good. And I always think about the people that are like, man, fasting is hard, right? What about those people? They're also worshiping Allah, right? And so my khutbah was about, remember, Allah is the one who's worthy of worship. Worship Allah, do not worship your feeling, right? It's Allah we're worshiping. Whether we feel like it or not, feeling is not irrelevant, it helps. But remember, you're not worshiping the feeling. The goal isn't the feeling, the goal is the worship of Allah, right? And so whether your iman is high, or whether you sometimes don't feel like it, the idea is Allah is the one that's worthy of worship. So anyways, so I hope that answers your question. We're going to get into the nature of the heart in a little bit too. Any other questions? Yeah.
So when giving that one, you say that rational arguments are overplayed and then people use rational arguments sometimes too much. Would you say that doing more of focusing on the spiritual side, more than the rational arguments would be a more effective way?
I'm saying that when you are making da'wah, you have to treat each person as an individual. Because some people, they're going to need rational arguments, right? So I'm not saying always use spirituality or always use these things and not rational arguments. That's not what I'm saying. You have to basically be like a physician. You have to see what the problem is and then diagnose it and then say, okay, this is the medicine, right? It's like, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he said, that rational arguments, they are medicine for the sick, but not nutrition for everybody, right? So that's how you understand it. Some people, they're very kind of cerebral, clinical, rational. They need rational arguments. So give them the rational arguments, not a problem. But understand that's not the end all and be all, right? Again, but that comes with experience, that comes with speaking to the person, knowing their background, what sort of trauma they went through, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. You have to know the person. That's why you really appreciate the jobs of the prophets and messengers when you make da'wah. Because then you see how difficult it is to deal with human beings, Anyways, any other questions? Yeah. So so I wouldn't categorize it as a punishment, because sometimes when your iman is low, you feel it's low, and it may be a way for you to worship Allah more. Maybe it's the door that opens you up to reward. So I wouldn't put it in the binary of punishment and reward per se. I would say, like, these are stages of the human being, right? Just like victory and defeat. I had mentioned this last night, that sometimes, Allah, I don't know if I mentioned this last night, maybe I'd mentioned it somewhere else, but sometimes Allah will give you victory, and sometimes Allah causes you to have defeat, right? وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. These are, alternating days that Allah does between the people. وَلِيَعْلَمَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, so that Allah can make it known who believes. So sometimes you'll be up, sometimes you'll be down. The important thing is, how much are you obeying Allah? Are you trying your best? That's really what counts at the end. So, anybody else? Yes, my man.
Is it rational and irrational the same as specific and unspecific?
Is it rational and irrational to say specific and unspecific? It depends on what you mean. But we'll have to ask that. I have to hold on to that question. Specific means something like to the point. Thank you. Right? And then what do you say? Unspecific? Is that what that was? Is more broad. So but that's not rational and irrational. Rational is, like I said, something that just makes sense. Irrational is something that makes no sense. Right? So like a square circle, is that rational? No, right? If it's a square, it's not a circle. If it's a circle, it's not a square, right? That's irrational. But if I said, my name is Fahad, is that rational? Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, yeah, it could be Fahad, right? It could be something else. But does that help? Yeah, okay. Any other questions? So I don't think Imran's here yet, so if you don't have any other questions, we can just break. And then you guys can chill for a little while. You can ask me personally and come up. You do have a, okay, Bismillah.
Okay, can you go back to the part where you were talking about, like, the person who doesn't believe in God having to bring the evidence?
Oh, the burden of proof.
Yeah. Can you go over that again, because you brought up self-evident?
Truth. Yes. Okay.
Go over that really quickly again, because it's always us on the defensive, and so that's why.
One of the purposes of this entire workshop is to get us out of the defensive.
Right.
That's my main goal, is to say, look, you don't have to be on the defensive, right?
Can you go on
Sure.
why they would have to?
So why an atheist would have to bring the burden of proof as opposed to you bringing the burden of proof is because we established that the person who brings the burden of proof is the burden of proof is upon the person who rejects a truth that is self-evident.
Okay, but what makes that truth self-evident?
The existence of God. What makes that self-evident?
Okay, thank you. So, right. So what I was saying was, if you understand cause and effect, okay? Cause and effect, it's like if you have a painting, you understand it has a painter, right? There's cause and effect, okay? Therefore, if you understand that everything that exists has a cause of some sort, it has to have a cause. That is what is self-evidently true. Cause and effect, and the cause is self-evidently true. So if you're denying that as a self-evident truth, you have to bring the proof.
But they're denying that there's a God, not that there was a Big Bang Theory.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that we're not talking, I didn't say, so remember, I said we're not saying God in the sense of our entire understanding of God. I'm not saying, okay, Allah is Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Quddus, As-Salam, As-Sub. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the attribute of Allah, which is Khaliq, He is the creator, meaning that He created everything, there's a source to everything, there's an initial cause to everything. That is what we're saying is the self-evident truth. We're not saying God in its entirety, everything we know about God. Just the fact that there was an initial cause, that something caused all of this to exist. They had to come from somewhere.
So who's to say that the atheist in that case would say, yeah, but it's not self-evident that there was another being?
That's fine. This is not for the proof of God. This is about who has the burden of proof. So if they say, yes, I believe that everything came from something, you've made progress now. Say, okay, well, let's now talk about what was that something? What was that first cause? Now you can come in and say, okay, let's now talk about why I believe that this is that first cause that you and I agree on. The problem is that initially it's like, no, the burden of proof is on you. No, it's not, right? But yes, if we can agree that there's a first cause, okay, now let's talk about what that first cause is, right? Again, the whole discussion was just about who has to prove what.
Yeah, that's what I'm actually trying to get to.
Right. You're trying to prove the first cause, let's put it that way, to make it just really simple. Was there a first cause or was there not a first cause? That's it.
So I guess at that point the conversation would be something like, did we just poof into existence? Or did something...
Well, someone that denies cause, maybe say that. In fact, the Quran mentions, أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ أَمْ خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ بَلْ لَا يُوقِنُونَ, right? That were they created from nothing, or did they create themselves, or did they create the heavens and the earth? Essentially what they're saying is, Allah is saying that there's only 4 options, right? And out of those 4 options, the only option that actually makes sense is an uncreated creator. That's it. But again, it goes on to burden of proof before you even start with that discussion. Because they'd be like, well, it's up to you, and now you're on the back foot trying to prove God. Well, why? Or not prove God, prove like a first cause. But you don't have to be. You can say like, did all of this come from nothing? It's a good question. But who needs to prove that is really what the question is. Who has the burden of proof? That's all we're talking about. This is not about the existence of God. We're not arguing for the existence of God. All we're arguing about is, do you bring the proof or do I bring the proof? For causation itself. Yeah. If you deny causation, then you have to bring the proof. But most people don't deny causation. A painting has a painter, right? A billiard ball, when you hit it, it's going to hit another billiard ball. That's cause and effect. That causal link, we observe it all the time. If you deny it, then you bring the burden of proof. Because it's as crazy as someone saying the past doesn't exist, which is self-evidently true, obviously, right? So, was that okay, or?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think from like a lot of us who have kids in public school and they go to
Right.
science classes.
So let me give you a recommendation. So one of the books that I mentioned, The Divine Reality, there's a chapter in there on self-evident truths and the burden of proof. So I think you'll be able to, along with letting all of this marinate and then reading the chapter, I think that'll help, inshallah. Yes? Oh, okay, you don't have a question, you're saying one more question. Okay, all right, one more question. We have 2 minutes, inshallah. Yes, bismillah. The Divine Reality. So initially, in the beginning, I'll bring that up. It's available for free on our website. You can download the PDF, or you can order it on Amazon as well. So I'm going to go through everything.
How can we search for No Doubt on Amazon? It doesn't seem to come up.
So it might not be available on Amazon. That you might have to download, because I think I actually had them pull it, or actually did not let them publish it on Amazon because I needed to make a few changes. So on that one, that might be on me. So, but just go ahead and download the PDF, and then I think they'll probably email once it's available on Amazon, inshallah. Yeah, it's right there, sapiensinstitute.org/books. All right, so I think we're going to break for lunch now. Do you want to do an announcement for that, or?